Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of Investments with yours truly, Dr. E. Let me see if I can get this coat. Can I get it? No, I can't. Oh, I'm missing a button. How about that? I must have popped it off trying to button my jacket. I popped it off like that. What can I tell you? All right. Time to go on a diet. I'm going to have to start walking to school. All right, so let's get back into investments. Get away from my waist and get back into investments. So we're in clip 2, chapter 2. This is investments 344, and we are in chapter 2, clip 2, which will be slides 11 through 18. So let's start by taking a look at this table that shows us how global equity markets did, the kind of performance they generated from 1986 to 1997. Okay, so we have a list of countries here and areas, and their returns, their annualized rates of return in their local currency, so in dollars and yen and so forth, and their ranking among the group, and then also their returns in US dollars and their ranking in US dollars. Okay? So I want to make 2 points about investing globally. And the first point I want to make is that you can often earn better returns in faster growing markets outside of the United States. And so we see that over this period of time, 1986, 1997, the annualized rate of return in the United States for the United States stock market was 16.7%. In Sweden, it was 22.1%, and in Spain, 21.7%. So going outside of the United States helps us find higher rates of return. Okay? But please keep in mind that exchange rates do affect returns, and sometimes that works for you. So here in Sweden, was ranked number 1 in local currency, but if you were a U.S. investor, that dropped down a little bit. Your return went from 22.1% to 21.6%. So in local currency, it worked for you. In the United States, it worked against you in local currency. Here you were ranked number 5 with 17.4% in foreign currency. Here in France, you earned 15.4%, in US dollars 17.4%. So it helped you here. If you were a US investor, if you were a French investor, it worked against you. Okay? So here, if you were a Swedish investor, it worked against you. If you're, in dollar terms, I'm sorry, if you were a US investor, let's go back here. If you were a US investor, hey, why is it doing that? There we go, that's what I want. It worked against you, and if you were a US investor, it worked for you. If you were a Swedish investor, it worked against you. If you were a French investor, it worked for you. So sometimes it works for you, the exchange rates, and sometimes it works against you. All right, so guess what? All investment professionals know that you have to factor in, when you're looking at returns, you also have to factor in what? If you said risk, thank you for paying attention to Dr. E. Risk, you have to factor in risk. So up here we have bundles of return and risk. So where do you want to be on this chart? Here's your risk, your standard deviation. The higher it is, the more volatile the returns are. And here are your rates of return up here. So where do you want to be? Well, you want to have a high rate of return and a low amount of risk. And so what do we see here? We see the United States, or North America, produced high returns, around 17%, and low volatility, less than 15%. Okay? And on the other hand, what you want to avoid are those areas that have low returns and high risk. Okay? So when you're looking at risk-adjusted rates of return, man, the United States did a lot better. Now, we see that Sweden and Spain that we saw on the previous slides that had really high rates of return, they also had higher standard deviations. Every investor has to answer this question for himself or herself. What am I willing to incur in terms of risk in order to get that additional rate of return. You go from 17% rate of return to 22% rate of return. You go from less than 15% volatility to 20 to almost 30% volatility. Only you know how much risk you're able and willing to take in order to get that additional return. But you most certainly don't want to go from less than 15% risk to 25% risk and go from 17% returns down to 7%. You most certainly don't want to do that. Okay, so let's look at the effects of combining low correlation assets, assets that don't move together, into a portfolio. Okay, so these are primarily bonds in here, but look what happens. So here we have, once again, we have standard deviation, we have risk down here on the x-axis, and we have rate of return here on the y-axis. And so we start with a 100% U.S. portfolio, and look what happens when we add foreign securities into the portfolio. Okay, returns go up from less than 7% to over 8%, and risk goes down from 9% into 8%. So that is genius. Here we have a nice genius here, Albert Einstein, who happened to be yet another Jewish genius, kind of like me, you know, Hebrew Christian genius here. And so when you diversify your portfolio, the point I want to make is when you add foreign securities to your portfolio, your returns go up, your risk goes down. And that is the definition, the epitome of diversification. Okay. Also, once I was in a conversation yesterday with someone and they used the word diversified when they meant to use the word diversity. So we're all college students here and college graduates in my case. Let's know the difference between diversity and diversified. Let me check, make sure this, yes, we're going. We are recording. Okay. All right. So let's get into a little more detail about the types of securities that are available to be invested in. Okay. And so we start with a very important term, asset classes. So we're starting with the big picture and then we'll get into individual securities. So within asset classes, what's an asset class? Different categories of assets, things of value in which you can invest. And so we've already looked at the two major types of asset classes, which are financial assets. And within financial assets, we have equities, fixed income, options, futures. Okay, these are all contracts. Okay, and then we have real assets. Real assets, and they include agricultural commodities, precious metals, energy, real estate, and then collectibles like wine and art and cars and sports cards, things like that. Okay, so let's look at more detail regarding fixed income securities. Fixed income is debt, a contractual schedule of interest and principal. We know how much interest and what the payments are going to be and when they're going to happen, and we know when the principal will be repaid. So the issuer has a legal obligation to pay to the investor or go into bankruptcy and to sell assets in order to pay bondholders what they borrowed from them. First, let's look at non-capital market instruments. Well, that sounds like a fancy term, but it's not that complicated. The capital markets are financial markets where securities are bought and sold. Non-capital market instruments include things like savings accounts. They are not bought and sold in the capital markets. Okay? So a savings account, as you know, very convenient, very liquid, meaning you can go get your money and you know how much you're going to get back. Very low risk because they're insured. They have very low minimums. That you can open one with $100, $50, but they also have very low returns. Okay? And then we have CDs, certificates of deposit. Okay? And these are issued by banks. Once again, because they're issued by banks, they are low risk, they are insured, but they have higher minimum size deposits. They require more, typically $1,000 than savings accounts. And they typically have a fixed duration. You can't access your money for a period of time unless you are willing to pay a penalty to get to your money. And it's usually durations like 3 months, 6 months, 1 year and 2.5 years. Okay? Why do people put their money in them? Because they have higher rates of return than a savings account. But I do want to caution you that there have been many schemes over the years where non-bank companies that are not banks, issue CDs. Please beware of these. They are not insured. And I'll just tell you a quick story. A friend of mine was a psychiatrist, went to medical school, he became a psychiatrist. He was helping his mother with her investments. He connected with a guy that I was started with in the investment business who was working for a company out of Houston, and that company issued CDs. First warning sign was the CDs were not issued by a bank. The second warning sign was the interest rate on the CDs was much higher than interest rates on bank CDs. So when the return is higher, what does that mean? It means the risk is higher. Well, this investment professional who should have known better put this guy's mother, a retired radiologist who worked all of her life, she was 80 years old, he invested $1 million of her assets into these CDs, which then the company went bankrupt. It was a shell game. It was a scheme, a Ponzi scheme. They went bankrupt. She lost all of her money. Beware. The rules, the basic rules of finance do work. Ignore them at your own peril. All right. Now let's move into capital market instruments. Securities that trade in the capital markets. Okay, they trade in the secondary markets. All right, governments, government debt. Government debt. Well, who issues government debt? Well, the U.S. Treasury is responsible to manage the cash flow of the government, pay all the payments that the government is obligated for. Okay, so this debt is backed by the full taxing power of the U.S. Congress. So if we run short on cash, the Congress will raise taxes and pay the bondholders back. Okay, so there are three different types of Treasury debt. The first is Treasury bills, which it's a year or less of maturity at the time of issuance. You'll get your money back in a year or less. Then we have Treasury notes, which are intermediate terms bonds. They have maturities ranging from 1 year to 10 years when they are first issued. And then we have Treasury bonds, which have maturities of 10 years or more when they are first issued. U.S. Treasuries. Then we have U.S. agencies. And U.S. agencies are organizations that are funded by and run by the U.S. government, and they have an indirect backing of the Treasury. The Treasury does not directly say if the agency debt goes bad, we'll pay it, but let's just say that an agency bond has never gone bankrupt. Okay? And so these agencies do a number of things. Typically what they do is they funnel money or loan money into certain sectors of the economy. These are housing agencies, and of course this has to do with farmers. So what they do is they issue bonds that are backed by the government, and so the interest rate on these bonds higher than the interest rates on treasuries, but lower than the interest rates on corporate bonds that have some what we call credit risk. Remember what credit risk is, the risk that the issuer will not pay interest or principal. Well, these treasuries and agencies don't have any credit risk, okay? And so people are willing to invest in them at lower interest rates, and then they, in turn, will take the proceeds, these agencies, and loan money to companies and individuals in these areas of the economy. They're trying to help the economy. All right, another government issuer of debt, municipalities. Okay, these are states, cities, or special districts that issue bonds to fund projects like schools, housing, water, sewer, hospitals, toll roads, airports. Okay, two types of municipal bonds out there. General obligation bonds are backed by the full taxing power of the issuing body being the states, the cities, or special districts. What this means is, kind of like the Treasury bond, if the bond gets in trouble, if the issuer gets in trouble, they raise taxes. Okay? And then revenue bonds. And revenue bonds do not have the full taxing power of the issuer behind them, but what they do is they invest in these projects like housing, like water and sewer, hospitals, toll roads, airports. And they build these things and they charge customers for using them, okay? They generate positive cash flow, and out of that positive cash flow, they pay the interest and the principal. All right, please note that the interest from municipal bonds is exempt. The interest is exempt from federal taxes and also from state taxes if you reside in the state where the bond is originated. So if you're in Arkansas and you buy an Arkansas bond, you don't pay taxes on the interest that is paid by the bond. However, please note that if you do sell a municipal bond for a gain, that means you buy it for $1,000 on Monday, and on Tuesday you sell it for $1,200. You have a $200 gain. That's called a capital gain, and you will pay capital gains taxes to federal and state authorities if you sell the bond at a profit. So you don't pay income taxes on the interest, but you do pay capital gains taxes on any gains. Okay, that's it for this clip. We'll move on.